Hello, and thank you for coming along once again. Today we're going to look at an article to begin with and then a larger problem. The article is entitled No Soil, No Growing Seasons, Just Add Water and Technology. It's an article that appeared in the New York Times, and you can get ready access to it. So we're going to look at the recent evolution of hydroponics and agricultural technology in general, as well as the tragic trajectory of the world food system. These things are related and need to be looked at together, the recent evolution and tragic trajectory of the world food system. Another report issued this month indicated that with less than a decade to 2030, the world is not on track to ending world hunger and malnutrition. And in the case of world hunger, we are moving in the wrong direction. This is a report issued by the UN, known as the SOPHI report. It's come out annually for more than 5 years now. And this is the latest one in July of 2021. So first, let's have a look at the recent evolution of technology of food production through this New York Times article published on the 6th of July. This is the evolution of food production, at least in some parts of the world, as we'll see. We're going to have a look at this New York Times article. You can find it easily enough by going to Transition Studies and just putting in the title of the article you're searching for. Transition Studies is the research platform you can use to get at primary material. And if you look to the search site box, it's a search site engine, you can put in the words in the title, no soil. And since there aren't many articles with that in the title, we can just say, go. And sure enough, you get the title printed here. And if you tap on that, you get access to the summary of the material. You can enlarge it if you want, and then tap the picture, and then you'll get out to the New York Times article itself, which is extraordinary. We're told no soil, no growing seasons, just add water and technology. And the subtitle indicates a new breed of hydroponic farm, huge and high-tech, is popping up in indoor spaces all over America, drawing celebrity investors and critics. Well, I'd urge you to read this article by Kim Severson. It was written on the 6th of July, and it's up to date. It's looking at the inside of one of these agro-tech industry installations in Moorhead, Kentucky. As she says, inside, without a teaspoon of soil, nearly 3 million pounds of beefsteak tomatoes grow on 45 feet high vines whose roots are bathed in nutrient-enhanced rainwater. Other vines hold thousands of small, juicy snacking tomatoes with enough tang to impress Martha Stewart, who is on the board of App Harvest, a startup that harvested its first crop here in January 2021 and plans to open 11 more indoor farms in Appalachia by 2025. This is clearly the development of high-tech agriculture in a large scale in the United States. You can scroll down and see the pretty pictures taken by the New York Times Photographer Luke Sharratt, including this one, which indicates in its subtitle here, the tomatoes at App Harvest were delicious enough to attract an investment from Martha Stewart. Go back up to the top if you like and take a look at what's involved with these photographs provided as part of the article. You can zoom in on them and see, in fact, that even in the midst of a pandemic with people wearing masks and some not wearing them, you have the full-scale activity of a new kind of farm worker who works in an enclosed environment with not a teaspoon of topsoil, alongside these 45-foot high racks where vines work their way up and roots are bathed in a nutrient-rich cycle of rainwater that's provided for them in order to grow hydroponically. These tomatoes, when red, are harvested and packaged and sent off to, among other places, retail outlets like Whole Foods. All of this, we're told, is part of the new breed of hydroponic farm. Take a look, read the article in its full length and in detail for all of the implications that it represents in the transformation of high-tech agriculture. So, as the article tells us, no soil, no growing seasons, just add water and technology. The accompanying photos are quite impressive. The tomatoes at App Harvest were delicious enough to attract an investment from Martha Stewart. This is the newspaper that advertises. It gives you all the news that's fit to print. And apparently it thinks this is fit to print. What's fascinating is that it's focusing on a new breed of hydroponic farm, huge and high-tech. It's popping up in indoor spaces all over America, drawing celebrity investors and critics, as the article points out. But the article doesn't spend much time on the critics. We'll want to look a little bit at the critics to give you a sense of what's problematic about this kind of farming, especially when it calls itself organic. The question's been raised in articles that you can follow again through transition studies, like this one. Are hydroponics watering down organic food standards?
On the line with us is Lisa Stokey. She is the founder and executive director of Next 7 and co-director of Food Democracy Now. Next7.org is the website. And Lisa, and you can tweet Lisa at Lisa_STOKKE. Lisa, welcome to the program.
Hi, it's so great to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for joining us. So the Food and Drug Administration has and correct me, in fact, jump in and interrupt me if at any point if I get any of this wrong.
USDA.
The USDA. Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
the USDA established standards for what is organic. If you want to label something as organic, it's got to be made, grown, produced, whatever, in a certain way, and they want to extend those standards to things that are produced hydroponically. Why is that a bad idea?
Well, I tell you what, those that would like to have hydroponic certified organic have done a really good job at trying to confuse the issue. But, for myself and, other advocates and certainly, long-time pioneering organic farmers who helped to write the standards and have been farming organically for decades are really super clear, that organic has always been in the soil. Nurturing the soil, building the soil, growing in the soil has always been a foundation of organic agriculture. And so, just looking at that, simple aspect of it, right, that soil is foundational, hydroponic doesn't really fit in with that, right? Because, a plant is getting its nutrients from a nutrient solution and not from, the rich, fertile soil that organic farmers build. And so sadly, we had that vote last week and we lost that vote, that our National Organic Standards Board could not agree that the foundation of organic is in the soil. And so, a lot of organic farmers around the country today are really finding themselves in a very unique and situation, I would say. And USDA has proven itself to not be a good partner for farmers.
So, okay, so with soil, let's define terms here. Dirt is ground up rock. Soil is ground up rock combined with massive amounts of organic material and living organisms, literally billions of living organisms per teaspoon. That is soil, and all those living organisms interact with things growing in that soil to transport nutrients, for example. You see, fungi performing this, bacteria performing that function. All of that goes away when you do something hydroponically. You're just delivering, water and nutrients directly to the roots of the plant, without the benefit of assistance by fungi and bacteria and viruses or whatever.
That's
so you've got that,
yeah.
number one. And number two, typically in hydroponic, at least the hydroponic operations that I've seen over the years, there's a lot of plastic piping and plastic tubing, and this soft plastic releases estrogen mimicking chemicals. So I don't, unless you're going to do hydroponic gardening with stainless steel pipes or water pipes, I mean literally, or excuse me, glass pipes to carry the water that are not, reactive with the water. I don't see how could you call that organic?
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're 100% right. You're spot on. And, this is the question, that we've been raising as well at next7.org. And maybe you saw our emails that we put out. And, in 48 hours before the meeting, I got almost 100,000 people, to sign on to this and say that just exactly what you're saying, that butter lettuce grown, floating in styrofoam, in water, in a nutrient solution, and plastic tubing with phthalates, just like what you were saying, that we know to be harmful, right? Endocrine disrupting chemicals. That's not organic. And, and you're 100% right. And like I said, it's really a disturbing situation that we're in, because millions of consumers, people, citizens rely upon, the organic label. And it just isn't, it's just the shadow, of what it used to be. And organic is now a victim of its own success.
Right. So basically what you've got now are companies that have figured out using hydroponic technologies, they can grow more food faster without the need for farms, without the need for as much dirt or soil.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say you're touching on that there, that it's just another, avenue for consolidation in our food industry, right? I mean, this is like the new CAFO, confined animal feeding operation, and GMO model, that they have now implemented here. And you're right. I mean, the people that have invested in hydroponic and are looking to have it certified as organic are people like who? Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, who just bought Whole Foods. And yes, they can have higher profit margins when they are growing food hydroponically, right? As opposed to paying, and supporting.
Does Whole Foods produce does Whole Foods produce any of their own food? I thought they were just a retailer.
What is happening now, and this is still emerging, right? Because that sale, of Whole Foods to Amazon is still pretty fresh, right? Pretty recent. But there are stories, in TechCrunch. There's a story that came out a few months ago about how Jeff Bezos and Eric Schmidt of Amazon and Google, respectively, have invested in a company called Plenty. Plenty is a hydroponic operation. The Plenty representatives and lobbyists were crawling at the meeting last week, the National Organic Standards Board meeting. As these meetings are, it's a lot of industry folks that show up and try to convince, the National Organic Program and the National Organic Standards Board, to, allow things into the organic program that really, quite frankly, don't belong, that are not organic.
Yeah.
And so this is, no pun intended, but this is really a watering down, of the organic standards in a very significant way.
There are other problems as well with the recent evolution of hydroponics and high-tech agriculture. And they're linked to the tragic trajectory of the world food system as a whole. This is what we want to turn our attention to in the same month as the article was produced in the New York Times, the 6th of July. Less than a week later, the UN published on the 12th of July the Food Security and Nutrition Report, known initially as SOFI, for the Security of Food International, for the Security of Food Insecurity, the State of Food Insecurity was its initial title back in 2015 when it began. Each year since, the state of food insecurity has been expanded in its scope, in its cooperating institutions, and in its warnings, which have been very severe in the last several years. The cooperating institutions include FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization, IFAD or IFAD, International Fund for Agricultural Development, UNICEF, the World Food Program, and the World Health Organization. An extraordinary array of UN agencies working together to produce a joint report. In fact, there have been several years of these SOFI reports, as they're referred to. State of Food Insecurity, as it was first referred to. It's been expanded to include nutrition in 2019 and 2020, and the latest one came out in July, the 12th of July, less than a week later than the New York Times article on hydroponic agriculture. Let's just look at the one the UN put together with all of these agencies, published on the 12th of July.
Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, the world was not on track to end world hunger and malnutrition in all its forms by 2030. Under the shadow of the COVID-19 pandemic, up to 161 million more people were facing hunger in 2020 than in 2019. New figures estimate that between 720 and 811 million people around the world faced hunger in 2020. The prevalence of undernourishment increased this past year to reach a level of 9.9%. Around 660 million people may still face hunger in 2030, in part due to lasting effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on global food security. This represents 30 million more people than in a scenario in which the pandemic had not occurred. More than half the world's undernourished are found in Asia. An additional 1/3 reside in Africa. Globally, 2.37 billion people did not have access to adequate food in 2020, an increase of nearly 320 million people in 1 year. Globally, malnutrition in all its forms also remains a challenge. In 2020, 149.2 million children under age 5, or 22%, were affected by stunting and 6.7% suffered from wasting. The actual figures are expected to be higher due to the effects of COVID-19. 38.9 million children under 5, or 5.7%, are overweight. In 2019, the high cost of healthy diets combined with income inequality caused healthy diets to be too expensive for around 3 billion people, a number expected to increase for 2020. In this environment, food systems transformations aimed at bolstering food security and nutrition are more important than ever before. Major drivers negatively affecting food security and nutrition include conflict, climate variability and extremes, and economic slowdowns and downturns. When food systems transformations focus on fostering greater resilience to these drivers, food systems can better provide affordable and healthy diets that are sustainable and inclusive. 6 transformation pathways, tailored to their specific context, will help us emerge from the shadow of the COVID-19 pandemic. And such a transformation can be a powerful driving force towards ending hunger, food insecurity and malnutrition in all its forms for all.
That then was the SOFI summary report. But the SOFI summary report, coming out annually, is not the only UN agency working on these things very urgently. In fact, several months ago, less than 3 months ago, in April of 2021, David Beasley, Executive Director of the World Food Programme, addressed the UN Security Council by way of a Zoom call, warning of a global hunger pandemic. It's worth listening to his words in detail and the tone of his delivery. This is not a casual report or a statistical summary. He's aware of these things and in fact mobilizes them very effectively, but he's speaking with a tone of urgency that's rare in diplomatic circles. Let's listen.
Thank you for the opportunity to brief the Security Council today on this very, very important issue. And forgive me for speaking bluntly, but I'd like to lay out for you very clearly what the world is facing at this very moment. At the same time, while we're dealing with COVID-19 pandemic, we're also on the brink of a hunger pandemic. In my conversations with world leaders over the past many months, before the coronavirus even became an issue, I was saying that 2020 would be facing the worst humanitarian crisis since World War II for a variety of reasons, such as the war in Syria, Yemen, the deepening crisis in places like South Sudan, and as John Eglin, I know, will no doubt set out about Burkina Faso in the central Sahel region, the desert locust swarms in Africa, as the Director General Chu highlighted in his remarks, and more frequent natural disasters and changing weather patterns that we're experiencing. The economic crisis in Lebanon, which is impacting millions of Syrian refugees, DRC, Sudan, Ethiopia, and the list goes on. We're already facing a perfect storm. So today with COVID-19, I want to stress that we're not only facing a global health pandemic, but also a global humanitarian catastrophe. Millions of civilians living in conflict-scarred nations, including many women and children, face being pushed to the brink of starvation, with the specter of famine a very real and dangerous possibility. This might sound truly shocking, but let me give you just some numbers. 821 million people go to bed hungry every night all over the world, chronically hungry. And as Dr. Chu just pointed out, as the new global report on food crisis that's published today shows, there are a further 135 million people facing crisis levels of hunger or worse. That means 135 million people on Earth are marching toward the brink of starvation. But now the World Food Program analysis shows also, due to the coronavirus, that an additional 130 million people could be pushed to the brink of starvation by the end of 2020. That's a total of 265 million people. On any given day now, WFP, we offer a lifeline to about 100 million people, up from about 80 million just a few years ago. This includes about 30 million people who literally depend on us to stay alive. If we can't reach these people with the life-saving assistance they need, our analysis shows that 300,000 people could starve to death every single day over a 3-month period. This does not even include the increase of starvation due to COVID. In a worst-case scenario, we could be looking at famine in about 36 countries. And in fact, 10 of these countries, we already have more than 1 million people per country who are on the verge of starvation. And in many places, this human suffering is a heavy price of conflict. At WFP, we are proud that the Council made the historic decision to pass Resolution 2417 in May 2018. It was amazing to see the Council come together. Now we have to live up to our pledge to protect the most vulnerable and act immediately to save lives around the world. But this is only, in my opinion, the first part of the strategy needed to protect conflict-riven countries from a hunger pandemic caused by the coronavirus. There's also a real danger that more people could potentially die from the economic impact of COVID-19 than from the virus itself. This is why I'm talking about a hunger pandemic. It is critical that we come together as one united global community to defeat this disease and protect the most vulnerable nations and communities from its potentially devastating effects. Lockdowns, economic recessions are expected to lead to a major loss of income among the working poor. Overseas remittances will also drop sharply. This will hurt countries like Haiti, Nepal, and Somalia, just to name a couple. The loss of tourism receipts will damage countries like Ethiopia, where it accounts for 47% of its total exports. The collapsing oil prices in lower income countries like South Sudan will have an impact significantly, where oil accounts for 98.8% of total exports. And of course, when donor countries' revenues are down, how much impact will this have on life-saving foreign aid? The economic and health impacts of COVID-19 are most worrisome for communities in countries across Africa as well as the Middle East, because the virus threatens further damage to the lives and the livelihoods of people already put at risk by conflict. WFP and our partners are going all out to help them. We'll do everything we possibly can. For example, we know that children are particularly vulnerable to hunger and malnutrition, so we are prioritizing assistance to them. Right now, as you may know, 1.6 billion children and young people are currently out of school around the world due to lockdown. Nearly 370 million children of these children are missing out on nutritious school meals. You can only imagine when children don't get the nutrition, which means their immunity systems are down. But this is why we are providing nutritious school meals where we possibly can in these suspended areas to help, whether it's take-home rations to help the families and help these children. As you know, WFP is a logistics backbone for the humanitarian world, and even more so now for the global effort to beat this pandemic. We have delivered millions upon millions of personal protective equipment, testing kits, face masks to about 78 countries on behalf of the World Health Organization. We are also running humanitarian air services to get frontline health professionals, doctors, nurses, and humanitarian staff into countries that need help, especially while the passenger airline industry is basically about shut down. But we need to do more than this, and I urge the Council to lead the way. First and foremost, we need peace. As the Secretary General recently said very clearly, a global ceasefire is essential right now. Second, we need all parties involved in the conflicts to give us swift and unimpeded humanitarian access to all vulnerable communities so that we can get the assistance to them that they need, regardless of who they are or where they are. We also need, in a very general sense, humanitarian goods and commercial trade to continue flowing across the borders because they are the lifeline of global food systems as well as the global economy. Supply chains have to keep moving if we are going to overcome this pandemic and get food from where it is produced to where it is needed. It also means resisting the temptation to introduce like export bans or import subsidies, which can lead to price hikes and almost always backfire. WFP, we're already working hand in glove with governments to build and strengthen national safety nets. This is critical right now to ensure fair access to assistance and to help maintain peace and stability and prevent rising tensions among communities. Third, we need coordinated action to support life-saving humanitarian assistance. For example, WFP, we are implementing plans to pre-position 3 months worth of food and cash to serve country operations identified as priorities. We're asking donors to accelerate the $1.9 billion in funding that has already been pledged so that we can build stockpiles and create the life-saving buffers and protect the most vulnerable from the effects of supply chain disruptions, commodity shortages, economic damage, and lockdowns. You understand exactly what I'm talking about. We're also requesting a further $350 million to set up a network of logistics hubs and transportation systems to keep the humanitarian supply chains moving around the world. They will also provide field hospitals and medical evacuations to the frontline humanitarians and health workers as needed and strategically. Excellencies, 2 years ago, the Security Council took a landmark step when it recognized and condemned the devastating human toll that conflict paid in poverty and hunger. Resolution 2417, it also highlighted the need for early warning systems. And today, I'm here to raise that alarm. There are no famines yet, but I must warn you that if we don't prepare and act now to secure access, avoid funding shortfalls, and disruptions to trade, we could be facing multiple famines of biblical proportions within a short few months. The actions that we take will determine our success or failure in building sustainable food systems as the basis of stable and peaceful societies. The truth is, we do not have time on our side, so let's act wisely and let's act fast. I do believe that our expertise and our partnerships, we can bring together the teams and the programs necessary to make certain the COVID-19 pandemic does not become a human and food crisis catastrophe.
In fact, a year before David Beasley's April 21st statement to the Security Council this year, the UN Food Program warned of an impending global food crisis, and Kumi Naidoo in London warned of its implications throughout Africa. This was back in the year 2020, before the COVID epidemic had had its major impact, was just beginning in Africa.
265 million. That's the number of people expected to face acute hunger as the coronavirus crisis could trigger a pandemic of hunger. This according to a new United Nations report. The study released Tuesday says the number of severely hungry people worldwide will nearly double by the end of this year due to the impact of the spread of COVID-19. On Tuesday, the head of the World Food Program warned the world will see multiple famines of biblical proportions if swift action isn't taken. The crisis is projected to disproportionately affect Africa, where there's already widespread hunger. In South Sudan, a food crisis affected more than 60% of the population last year. Now, with the coronavirus, reports of growing desperation are laying bare rampant inequality across the continent. In South Africa, which is under strict lockdown, as the African nation with the most reported COVID-19 cases, there's reportedly a food crisis in Cape Town, as the ongoing lockdown has left informal workers who've lost their livelihoods with little relief. There are also reports of growing panic about hunger in Nigeria. This is a resident of Lagos, Nigeria's largest city.
If this coronavirus did not kill people with disability, definitely this hunger of stay at home will kill people. Because let me tell you, most of my people, they don't eat.
This comes as the World Health Organization estimates the number of COVID-19 cases in Africa could rise to 10 million in the next 3 to 6 months. The New York Times reports public hospitals in 41 countries across Africa have less than 2,000 ventilators. 10 African countries do not have a single ventilator. For more, we're going to London, where we're joined by Kumi Naidoo, the former Secretary General of Amnesty International, former head of Greenpeace. He's a lifelong South African human rights activist and climate justice activist, was the first African to head Greenpeace. Kumi, welcome back to Democracy Now! As you hear those figures about Africa, and particularly what's happening in your country of South Africa, where decades ago you were very well-known anti-apartheid activists as you started your activism right through to today. Talk about what Africa faces.
I think this is an extremely terrifying and frightening moment for the people of Africa. It's important to note that that report that was released by the World Food Programme was already saying to the world that in 2020, we were already facing a major food crisis. That was before the coronavirus hit. Now we're looking at a situation where the report says that we could be looking at about 300,000 deaths per day over a 3-month period. Now, the reality for Africa is that before even the coronavirus hits, this is what we are dealing with. We're dealing with healthcare systems that are not strong. We're dealing with a population that has high levels of vulnerability because of the high levels of HIV, AIDS, and tuberculosis, and malaria. And we're looking at economies that are actually really struggling. So right now, I think we are in a very vulnerable state as the African continent, and we hope that international solidarity will be there to help our people get through this very bumpy ride ahead of us. So that's why I think, the efforts now that are being made by individual African countries, but also by the African Union, needs to be generously supported. Because for many people in Africa right now, the choice is almost also between, if you want a pandemic that's a health pandemic or a hunger pandemic. And as many people are saying, if we don't get killed by COVID-19, we'll get killed by hunger.
As it turns out, events in South Africa this month have now proved these warnings to be correct. The warnings were that a double pandemic, a public health pandemic, and what's being called the pandemic of food insecurity, a pandemic of starvation, threatens large parts of the world. In South Africa, this is quite dramatic.
As we turn to South Africa, where police say the death toll from the ongoing protests and unrest has risen to at least 72. Over 3,000 people have been arrested since demonstrations erupted after former President Jacob Zuma began his 15-month jail sentence for refusing to testify in a corruption probe. Demonstrators expressed frustration with entrenched poverty and inequity as South Africa battles a devastating wave of COVID-19. Looters said they were motivated by financial hardship.
Not about Zuma or what. It's about poverty. My sister. That you cannot dodge. People are hungry. There are no jobs. We cannot dodge.
People were running around causing chaos and then saying they have no food, so they're going to get some. So I also did the same. I stole food. I won't even lie.
Now the South African government says it'll call up reservists for the first time in decades. The army is preparing to deploy tens of thousands of soldiers.
Events in South Africa underscore the global food tragedy now unfolding in the wake of the public health pandemic.
As we look at how the COVID-19 pandemic's fueled a sharp increase in the number of people going hungry around the world. A new report on the state of food security and nutrition in the world found about 1/10 of the global population is undernourished last year. More than 2.5 billion people lacked access to sufficiently nutritious food. United Nations says 1 in 5 children around the world now face stunted growth. This is 25-year-old Zatina, who lives in a village in western Madagascar, has not been able to work during the pandemic. She has 3 children who are malnourished. She spoke to Al Jazeera English.
Without this aid, we would have died. We'd been eating plant roots, which gave us permanent stomach aches. As a woman, I personally no longer have enough energy to go and dig up those roots. Even men are unable to do so anymore.
For more on how COVID, as well as conflict and the climate crisis, are contributing to the rising level of hunger, we're joined by Saskia de Pey, who is the World Food Programme's head of systems analysis for nutrition. Welcome to Democracy Now! Can you lay out the findings, Saskia, of this global report?
Yes, good morning. Sure. So the global report shows that the increase of undernutrition, meaning hungry people, has really increased. We're up to 811 million in 2020. And that's a consequence, as you said, of conflict, of climate change and climate shocks, as well as the economic downturns, where it's really the COVID pandemic that has sparked a lot of that. And furthermore, there's a lot of malnutrition that comes with that. So 1/5 of children with stunted growth, it's their growth and it's their development. So suffering malnutrition early in life has a prolonged effect throughout the rest of life. So it affects ability for schooling, it affects income earning as an adult, and it affects health, non-communicable diseases, diabetes, cardiovascular disease as an adult as well. So the consequences of the hunger and the malnutrition increase that we're seeing today is going to be long-term.
I want to go to the chief economist of the Food and Agricultural Organization, Maximo Torero, laying out the key findings also of this report.
We found that 720 to 811 million people around the world face hunger in 2020. This number is approximately 118 million more people that were facing hunger in 2020 with respect to 2019. What this means is that 418 million people are more undernourished in Asia, and around 282 million people are more undernourished in Africa. And in Latin America, we also seen an increase to 9.1% of the population being undernourished today. When we look at the real reasons behind hunger, always conflict, climate extremes, and economic downturns and slowdowns are the major reasons behind the increase in the hunger and undernourishment.
So Saskia, you talked earlier, and as did Maximo now, about undernourishment and the long-term effects of undernourishment, especially on children. Could you say how many children have been impacted by hunger or undernourishment, and what areas are worst impacted? Where are people the most hungry, or more people hungry?
So the largest number of hungry people is in Asia. The largest proportion of hungry people is in Africa. There are there's many children suffering acute malnutrition, and children can suffer that multiple times in a year or in their young life. And there's stunted children is around 22%, and it has increased because of COVID. And the projections are that also in 2030, we will still see the impact of the stunting, so the undernutrition early in life that's happening today.
And could you explain, Saskia, what is the hidden hunger, and what are the distinctions between a healthy diet and a sufficient diet, and how was that taken into account in the report?
Yeah, so the report reminds us that 3 billion people were unable to afford a healthy diet, and that's actually the case in 2019. And we're seeing an increase with at least 140 million people because of COVID now. And it's not only the number who cannot afford, but it's also the extent to which they cannot afford. So that healthy diet, a synonym for that would be a recommended diet. So it's a diet that gives us enough vegetables, fruits, a good variation of protein-rich foods. It's as food-based dietary guidelines tell us how to eat. And doing that at the lowest possible cost, that has been the benchmark for the 3 billion. Now, as I say, it depends to what extent you cannot afford such a recommended or healthy diet. So if you can only afford 50% of that, your diet is of much lower quality than if you cannot afford the last 10% of that cost benchmark. When you can only afford 50%, you'll have deficiencies of vitamins, of minerals, and you may not really notice it, but those affect like your energy levels, your brain development as a child. It affects many bodily functions, but you don't really feel hungry, nor do you look hungry. So that number of up to 811 million people hungry, beyond that, there's also many more people who suffer that hidden hunger.
So what is the World Food Programme's most important demand for dealing with this crisis of 1/10 of the world hungry?
Yeah, so we are planning this year to reach 138 million people directly with our food assistance. So ensuring that they have better access to foods. Which comes in different forms. It comes in kind provision of food. It also comes in the form of cash, so that they can participate in the local market. And that brings us also to be engaged in food systems, in social protection systems, so to provide a way for the systems that people engage with on a daily basis to provide better for them.
So, no soil, no growing seasons, just add water and technology? We have to consider the recent evolution and the tragic trajectory of the world food system. It's doing two things at once. In parts of the world, especially those where there are celebrities and rich investors, there's a development of high-tech agriculture dependent on enormous use of water, fossil fuels, plastics, indoor environments, creating the illusion of healthful food without any soil. At the same time, that there's a massive development of a tragic trajectory in the world food system as a whole. It's important to adopt the overview effect in considering problems of food production, growing hunger, and human survival in a complex ecosystem. We need large-scale, long-term planning to match the large-scale, short-term crises, because we need this fast. With less than a decade to 2030, the world is not on track to ending world hunger and malnutrition. And in the case of world hunger, we are moving in the wrong direction. These were the words of the UN SOFI report earlier this month, July 2021.